Good morning. Boardrooms, battlefields, classrooms. These are the areas where leadership stories begin, most often. Mine began in a burning house. And I remember the smell of wet charred wood, smoky, rainy, and you could hear the wood crackling as it fell, and the silence as people watched as my home burned to the ground, like spectators. But this was my life. This was my home. So I sat there with a feeling of desperation and hopelessness watching the home burn. You see, I was just a little girl, just 5 years old, young enough to believe that homes were permanent and walls equaled protection. But fire has a way of teaching quickly. When I was just 4, my mother remarried to a man with ties from the mob. Yeah, that mob. Yeah. And he lived up to that reputation. There was lots of violence in my home, much, much more than a 4-year-old should ever have to experience. And he made a promise that night. He says, "If you ever leave me, I'm going to burn your home to the ground." And if nothing else, he was a man of his word. The fire was determined to be arson. And even more striking, my aunt, my mother's sister, we found was involved in setting the fire. You seriously can't make this stuff up, right? Right? But the truth is, the fire was not remotely the first of the challenges that I faced, just one of many. So I was born 6 weeks premature with quite a few medical challenges that required me to sit upright for my first year of life. Can you imagine my mother with one in diapers and another sick child that can't lay down? Can you imagine the stress in that home at that time? As you can imagine, my parents divorced quickly with all that stress. My father left when I was 2, abandonment number 1. When I was 3, my mother couldn't afford to take care of both my brother and I, so I was sent to live with relatives at age 3, abandonment number 2. At age 4, she believes things are stable enough for me to come back home to live with a man from the mob. So, obviously, you know what was right around the corner, right? The fire, the ashes, the betrayal. There were also issues of abuse throughout my childhood. When I was 15, when my mother should have protected me, when I came forward and with claims, the truth of abuse, I was thrown out of the house. Everything I owned in a cheap plastic trash bag out in the middle of the highway. I'm standing there and cars are just driving by as I'm standing there with my plastic bag in tears. I found myself on my own at age 15. But that day changed me and really began to shape the leader that I would become. In adulthood, there were kidnappings in Juarez, Mexico. There were bully executives. There were unethical leaders. It would take a 3-day weekend to tell all the stories. So I urge you to take a look at the book whenever you get a chance, and you'll get all of that detail there. I can assure you won't be bored. And people assume that the end of the story must be brokenness, and it could have been. It could have been. But survival teaches you how to overcome and how to endure. And that's really what Ashes to Influence is all about. It isn't what happens in the fire that's important. It's what you do with the ashes afterwards. We've all been through adversity, and it's what we choose to do after the fact that's important, and moving from that survival mode into influence. So let's talk about what survival mode looks like. So I can make sure I get this up here. You see, the things that help shape us as a leader are not always healthy, especially when it comes from adversity. If there's one thing I want you to walk away with today, it's this. I want you to understand how adversity shapes leadership and what we as leaders have to do to counteract that. So let's dissect this further. Hypervigilance. Anyone know what that is? Hypervigilance is always being on guard, right? Never shutting off, waiting on that next crisis to come. Being vigilant is good, right? We praise being vigilant, but hypervigilance is unhealthy. And think of a juggler, right? 3 balls is okay. Not for me, but 3 balls is okay for most. There's 4 balls, that's a little more challenging. When you get that 5th ball in there, right, something dramatic is about to happen, right? 1 ball is going to be a catastrophe. And can you imagine living like that 24/7? That's what hypervigilance is, right? You're never shutting off. Then you have overfunctioning, the fixers. We have any fixers out in the audience? Right? And too often we are praised for always being the capable ones, right? Always the ones that come through, right? This could be a high performance athlete. I talked to one lovely lady last night. We were talking about it doesn't have to be from adversity, but there's reasons why some people become over functioning, and those fixtures are those that try to carry what belongs to everyone else. They create dependencies in the organization. They're afraid that something's going to fail, and so they don't let others take control. They don't delegate well, right? Everything has got to go through them, that bottleneck. And then there's emotional suppression, not getting your needs met. Has anyone ever heard of the Berkman model or the Berkman assessment in the back? So the Berkman was one of my favorites because if we're not getting our needs met, we're in a pressure cooker. And the Berkman is the one that told me who I was in a normal environment and who I was when I wasn't getting my needs met. And I can assure you those are 2 very different people, right? And so the Berkman really helped me to understand that emotional suppression. If you're not getting your needs met and you're not getting that tank filled up, it's going to come out in other leadership behaviors. And then there's overendurance. Does this look familiar to anybody? Right? We talked about burnout last night at dinner, burnout. Right? In HR, we are one of the number 1 departments that's up for burnout because we're taking on everybody's stress. We're taking on all that emotion for everybody else, and we're trying to fix everyone else. Right? Who's taking care of HR? Okay. And many of you have stories of like mine in this room, right? You didn't become leaders because it was easy, right? And you didn't overcome adversity because it was easy. It's likely because you didn't have any other choice. So the question is, how long can you sustain that pressure? Especially as HR leaders, right? Who's filling up your tank? And that's where survival mode becomes unhealthy. You can only sustain that pressure for so long. So what if you learned how to move from leading in fear and learn to lead from courage instead? So let's talk about what does that look like. It's called stewardship. So stewardship is being an intentional and responsible caretaker of the people and the resources we've been entrusted with. And stewards refocus from looking inside and they start refocusing on others. It's amazing what happens when it stops being about you and you start helping people. And HR is usually pretty good at that, right? But we consider the impact of the individuals that we've been entrusted with. What kind of impact are you having on your people? Is it stress or is it empowerment? And stewardship is also about giving credit and taking accountability. It looks like coaching in private and taking accountability for your team's mistakes in public. Have you ever seen a leader that doesn't stand up for their team, and when something goes wrong, they just let their team, fail in front of everyone? That's really uncomfortable, right? That's really uncomfortable. That's not healthy. So you always want to praise in public and coach in private. And stewards delegate to their teams. Have you ever heard the saying, "Not my circus, not my monkey"? Right? It doesn't have to always be our monkey. It sometimes belongs on others' plates and not ours. So we've got to make sure that we're delegating to our teams. If we never give them opportunities to learn, then we're going to forever be doing that work for them. As we talk about AI and as we're learning how to be more efficient and get more of those non-value added tasks off of our plate, it's critical that we find ways for them to learn, for us to delegate, let them go learn that new AI task. And stewardship is building trust and transparency. It's giving your team opportunity to make those mistakes. And it also gives them the opportunities to say whoa. And we have that's my code word in our organization. So I come from a little town called Happy, Texas. Anybody from the panhandle of Texas? No, nobody knows what happened. You've certainly seen the movie Happy Texas. Well, Happy Texas is nothing like the movie. But I come from Happy Texas, so whoa is quite appropriate. And in my organization, because I'm a DI on the DISC scale, anybody know what that is? Right? I'm a driver that likes to have fun. I talk fast, I move fast, typical Texas girl. And so we use the term whoa or hang on a minute. Stacy, hang on just a minute. And the minute I hear my team say that, that is my cue to back up, right? I've been in those uncomfortable situations where leaders didn't give me that psychological safety to be able to do that. And so I make sure I do that with my team. Take a step back and say, hold on a minute, I'm going too fast, right? I recognize my personality style is opposite of yours. I'm going too fast. Maybe I don't have all the facts. Maybe I'm about to go off the cliff and my team's just trying to protect me, right? So very, very important. That's what building trust and transparency is all about, because they can come to me and say, hang on just a minute, and no, they're not going to get in trouble for it. And as I shared, one of my absolute favorites is creating psychological safety. And that is so incredibly important in today's world when we have so much mental illness out there and just burnout, right? It's up to us to help create that psychological safety in our organizations as we are running faster than ever, as we are going through so much change every single day. It's stressful out there. And so we've got to make sure that we're creating that psychological safety for our teams to be able to speak up, right? They got to be able to speak up and say, hang on just a minute. And when they make a mistake, what do we do, right? I reward my team for having the courage to come forward. That's our number one rule. When you make a mistake, you come forward, let's talk about it, we learn from it, and guess what? We move on. And we move on. And unless they keep repeating that same mistake, right? They shouldn't be hanging on to that. You know that your people are harder on themselves than we could ever be. And so give them that psychological safety. Because when you create that psychological safety, we get accountability, clarity, and sustainable leadership. And we empower our team. There we go. This look familiar? And finally, stewards know how to regulate themselves, right? Anybody from an airline? Right? Here's where the exits are. We regulate ourselves before helping others. So thinking about on the airplane, right? You've got to put on your own oxygen mask before you help others. Very, very important, right? You're not any good to anyone else if you can't regulate your own emotions and your own stress levels. My personal regulator is my faith. And it's not important what it is, it's that you have a regulator. For me, when I start to get stressed, my immediate regulator is my faith. I take a quick breath. I say a quick prayer. I take a walk around the block. Something to get me regulated before I walk into a room with my team or into a meeting room with my team. You don't want to be leading with those emotions. And what matters is that you have a regulator. And have you ever worked with a leader that's not regulated? I know you have. Y'all, we coach them every single day, right? They run into the meeting and they're frantic and right, that rubs off on their people. And so it's really critical that we talk to them about regulation. Right? It takes 2 seconds to take a quick breath. I was talking with one of the ladies last night and talking about meditation, whatever it is for you, whatever your regulator is. Again, faith does it for me, always. And speaking of regulation, did you know that Harvard research says that executives without clear personal and professional boundaries are at a 2.6 times higher burnout rate than those with boundaries? So we talked a little bit yesterday about boundaries, burnout, things like that. So if we don't regulate ourselves, we are at a 2.6 times higher risk of burning ourselves out and burning our teams out. So how do we do that? How do we prevent emotional exhaustion? By establishing boundaries, by delegating where appropriate, by pushing back where appropriate. I'll give you a story. There's a regional director that he's notorious for he likes to jump 2 or 3 levels in the organization. He comes straight to me every time. And you know what I'm talking about, right? They want the top person in HR. They don't feel like they can trust anybody else. And I've had to really push back with him and teach him, you have a perfectly capable HR director there supporting you. And so it's about pushing back. It's not that we don't have an open door policy, but it's not helpful. It's not helpful to him. It's not helpful to her. And it's certainly not helpful to me if I'm always the one that rescues both of them. Stop always being the fixer. Right? We can't always be the fixer. Someone else on our team has got to learn how to do that work and start practicing self-care. Very, very important. I can tell you, I've hit the wall so many times. I've been that Energizer bunny until the batteries go dead. Anybody out there with me? Be honest, how many have hit the wall, right? We have all been there. We've hit the wall. It becomes too much. And so we've got to make sure that we are protecting ourselves and practicing self-care. And I love the quote, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Anybody with me? Right? We have to fill up our cups. And you're looking at that poster child from running with an empty cup for many, many years. And that's really what Ashes to Influence is about. You'll learn in the book a lot about the lessons I learned over the years for not taking care of myself as a leader, as a mother, as a wife, just as a human being, not taking care of myself. So let's talk about what is the formula for stewardship. Any mathematicians out there? Oops. No mathematicians, all HR, okay. So the formula is stewardship is care and responsibility plus integrity plus long-term thinking applied to the people, culture, and resources you've been entrusted with. Okay? Stewardship is care plus responsibility plus integrity plus long-term thinking applied to the people, culture, and resources you've been entrusted with. So to wrap things up, the little girl standing outside that home, that burning home, believed that strength could overcome anything. And that belief served me well for years. It helped me to endure, to overcome, to lead, even succeed. However, while adversity builds strength, it doesn't build peace. And it doesn't build stewardship. So there's a choice. This little girl that was holding those little metal piggy banks full of pennies, right? That's all we had. That was all that was left of that home. I thought I'd lost everything, but that fire, it taught me courage, clarity, conviction at age 5. So we must decide, Are we going to just keep surviving? Or are we going to start leading with courage? You see, the fire can either harden us or it can refine us. And the difference is whether we stay in survival mode or we move to influence. Again, it's a choice. So, influence is not what we gained in the fire, let me remind you, right? It's what we do with that after the fire. You stay in that survival mode or do you move? And each of us has faced adversity in this room of some sort. And I don't mean to pick any scabs today because we've all been there. And the fire didn't destroy us, right? We're still here. It shaped us. And it's our job to shape others. And the most powerful leaders are not the ones that avoided the fire. They're the ones that learned how to transform the ashes into influence. And the question you might ask yourself is, do I have the courage to take the journey from ashes to influence? Okay. So I do want to leave you with a few reflections, questions that you might want to ask yourself. How do survival skills show up in my leadership? How am I shifting from reaction to stewardship? How am I regulating my emotions? What are my boundaries to avoid burnout? And most importantly, how am I creating psychological safety in my organization? Right. I want to thank you so much for allowing me just a few moments of your time today to talk through a little bit of my journey, just a few snippets. And I look forward to hearing about your journeys as well throughout the conference. Come find me. I did bring a few books with me if anyone is interested and wants a signed copy. There's also some cards on the table, certainly if you'd like some more information. But seek me out. Let's have a chat because I have I have an idea that a few of you guys have a few stories out there you might want to share. So thank you again. Thanks for the time. Have a great conference.